Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's broadcast of the Marin Symphony Orchestra. I'm delighted to welcome as my guest the contrabassoon player of the Marin Symphony since 2008, David Granger. So good afternoon, David, and good to see you. How are you, and what have you been up to?
Well, I'm fine, and it's great to see you. And I've been keeping myself extremely busy.
Good. Tell us,
So
so what form has that taken? Multiple projects, or tell us what you've been up to.
yeah, I was as soon as the shutdown began in March, I said, okay, it's time for me to practice retirement. And I planted a huge garden, a vegetable garden, more than a couple dozen vegetables. I also have fruit trees. Yeah, my vegetable garden is over 1,000 square feet.
Wow.
So it's quite large, tiered and everything. And so March, I got the soil ready and I planted things in April. And then I spent most of July and August canning and making sauces and from all the produce and everything. And then I have a fall garden. I planted another garden in September. Right now I'm growing cauliflower, broccoli, kale, lettuce,
Wow.
spinach, carrots, garlic, all sorts of things. So
Has
that's
it been success that that's come out of the vegetable patch? Something that you thought, wow, that's a real winner.
yeah. Right now I could turn the camera around, and you can see in my studio I have 12 boxes full of canned vegetables, green beans, tomato sauces, salsa. Yeah, so I'm eating good.
You are set.
Yeah, so yeah, I was thinking that part of the reason I bought the property I did was my plan was that when I eventually do retire, I'll have a garden.
Wonderful. Well, that
So,
sounds absolutely delicious.
and then so once the garden got planted, I said, okay, I think it's time for me to learn more about how to make bassoon reeds. So I had these books on reed making, which I've never read. So I'm slowly reading through them. My reed making tool or machines were getting old, so I bought new machines, and that's a whole learning process and learning how to make the reeds you want on new machines. And I have a side order business of making reeds for others. I have a website and things like that. So it's all about learning more about my craft. And
Explain to some of our audience who may know the concept of what a reed is, but why is it so important particularly for double reed players like the oboes and the bassoons, to have a reed that works, and what are some of the characteristics of that?
well, the reed is the mouthpiece of the instrument, and it vibrates, causing the air inside the instrument to vibrate. And how well it vibrates determines how well the instrument responds and what the tone is. And actually, during my life, I've become good enough that people like my reeds and people buy my reeds, professional and amateur. And but they're never as good as you want them to be. So
Why is these things so complicated? Because in theory, you would think, well, a reed is a reed is a reed, right? You just put these two pieces of the cane together and you sort of put them together and they vibrate, just like you said. But what makes it so much more complicated than that?
I don't remember why it was so hard. Now it seems pretty obvious to me. But when I teach my students and I say, okay, well, what I did when I finally sat down when I was 40 years old and struggling with reeds and saying, I really need to learn how to make reeds, so I'm not worried about the next concert, whether I'm going to have a reed for it or not. So I just sat down and held the reed up to a light so I could see through it to see what the color, what the shades are. And I decided, well, I'll just try to make the reed look like it's supposed to, according to what I was taught. And I tell that to my students, and they have no idea what the reed is supposed to look like when you hold it up to the light. And trying to explain it to them is really a task. And so it's just, it basically boils down to experience. And my personal belief is that every bassoonist learns how to make reeds on their own. That's not something you can really teach. You scrape, and either that helps the reed or it doesn't, and eventually you figure out what helps you make your reeds for you.
Right.
And yeah, what works for me and my instrument may be not at all good for someone else on a different instrument.
So it's pure trial and error.
Well, that's my belief. Eventually, you just have to, it's the 10,000 thing. After you make 10,000 reeds, you figure out how to make them. Yeah. And that's part of the reason
sorry, go ahead.
That's part of the reason I started my little business. Because now I can make 8 reeds and they last the whole season for me. One of my teachers, Harold Goltzer, who is associate principal in the New York Philharmonic, he had 8 boxes of 8 reeds going all the time. And I asked him why you do that. And he says, I'm afraid I'm going to forget how to make them. And so that stuck with me. And I started this reed making business. So I'd keep on making reeds every day so I won't forget how to do it.
That's cool. So tell us about the bassoon in the first place. Did you come to it, or did it come to you?
Okay, my father was a big stage band fan. His favorite musician was Tommy Dorsey.
Mm-hmm.
And so my first instrument was the baritone, because I wasn't big enough to play the trombone. Couldn't reach it with the slide.
Nice.
That lasted a few months. I didn't take. Then his second favorite musician was Benny Goodman.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a clarinet. My hands were so small I couldn't play a regular B flat soprano clarinet. My first clarinet was an E flat soprano, the piccolo clarinet.
Right.
Played that for about 6 months, and then I gradually got big enough to play the B flat clarinet. And then when I was in 8th grade, my clarinet teacher was actually Michael Spielman, principal bassoonist in the Kansas City Philharmonic. And he taught clarinet on the side during extra income. And so when I was in 8th grade, he said, well, why don't you play bassoon? And I said, and I was thinking, there were a lot of clarinet players in junior high, but there weren't any bassoonists. And I was a really good clarinet player, but all the other kids were catching up to me. And so I said, okay, well, I'll switch to bassoon because I didn't want to deal with all the competition.
Uh-huh.
And it took. I don't know. You can't explain these things, but
no, you all gravitate. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And
of course, the great irony is when I got to high school, there were 3 other bassoonists.
No, really?
Yeah, we had 4 bassoonists in my high school.
Kind of freakish, isn't it?
I know. Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway, that was good though, because that made me practice more.
So the modern bassoon and contrabassoon, of course, that part of the same family, is an instrument that stretches back hundreds of years and has obviously evolved a great deal, as all woodwind instruments have over the period of time. And I know that its origins are something that really interests you. And you actually, in this room, I believe, have quite a menagerie of precursors to the modern instruments. And I wonder if you could give us a little tour through some of the cages in this menagerie and show us what you have.
Sure. So what happened with me in 1998, this is after I was in the Sacramento Symphony, where you were our district director for a while, as I recall, back when we were both very young.
We were.
And
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I bought an instrument from a friend who needed money and wasn't going to play his Baroque Bassoon anymore. And I started taking lessons with Kate Van Orden, who is a world famous musicologist. She's now teaching at Harvard. First class Baroque bassoonist. And but then I decided, but her instrument was different than mine. I don't want to get into the differences between Baroque bassoons, but so there was a lot of things like with reeds she couldn't help me with. So I ended up going to these amateur workshops during the summer. We have them, there's a San Francisco Early Music Society. They have a workshop every summer. And there I met Michael McCraw, who was the bassoon teacher there. And he was one of the pioneer early musicians of the last century. began playing Baroque bassoon. He was a very accomplished modern bassoonist, but then switched to Baroque bassoon, and eventually ended up going to Germany for a couple of decades, and then came back to America. Anyway, he opened my eyes to the new understanding of how to perform Baroque music. And I just fell in love with this new way of playing Baroque music. So I wasn't getting better fast enough. And so I decided, well, I'll take a year off and go study with Michael. At Indiana University, the Early Music Institute. And so I had my Baroque bassoon, but part of the degree is to learn to play early classical bassoon, Dulcian, which is the first bassoon. And then also I bought an early Baroque contrabassoon and a classical romantic contrabassoon. So I have 5 early instruments and 2 modern instruments. So let me show you the really the Dulcian and the Baroque bassoons, the only ones I really became proficient on. I did play classical bassoon professionally for a short while, but there's too many bassoons and too many reeds to keep up with.
Sure.
So each one has a different reed. So this is the Dulcian. It's
beautiful.
2-key instrument. That's 1 key. There's another key. Everything else is holes. It has a range of 2 octaves and a minor third, theoretically. And the Dulcian was probably invented around 1530. It was meant in the Renaissance, in the 16th century. There were wind bands that performed outdoors, consisting of, in the late 16th century, there'd be cornetto, alto sham, 2 tenor trombones or sackbuts, and the Dulcian. That was a kind of a standard complement of an instrument. So it was a loud instrument. This particular model is a copy, maybe a compilation of museum instruments that Leslie Ross in New York made. I bought it in the year 2000. It probably would be considered an early 17th century Dulcian. Let's see what it sounds like.
Wow, that's quite a sound, even over the Zoom waves. And I can see why you said it would be very suited to out of doors.
Yeah, and actually this, in the 17th century, they developed a cap. And most of the repertoire for this instrument is for a cap Dulcian, and most of the chamber repertoire is with violins.
Aha.
And I made a CD, and on that CD, I used this instrument, and it's primarily 2 violins, continuo and Dulcian, considered equally solo instruments in those.
Right. So that's very interesting. So that's the one of the earliest examples of the ancestors of the modern bassoon, and obviously with the minimum hardware. You said there were only 2 keys.
Only 2 keys. Yeah, there are records of people playing Dulcians next to Baroque bassoons in Bach's orchestras.
I see.
So it was played, and in Spain, it remained the primary bass wind instrument all through the Baroque era. The Baroque bassoon is actually a French invention designed around 1630. This one is a copy of a museum in a private collection in London. And the only identification number it has on it is HKICW. So no one knows who actually that is. But evidently the maker probably made around 1700. Music changed in the 17th century. It went from the early Baroque style into the French opera style, and different instruments were required. The pitch drop, a Renaissance pitch, is generally 466, which is a B flat.
Right.
And that's what Dulcians normally are pitched at. The Baroque bassoon is pitched at A415. which is
Uh-huh.
a flat. And
Yeah.
that and now there's actually now French Baroque pitch, which is 392.
Gosh, I was not aware there would be math on the interview, but continue and give us a little toot on this one. So this would have been around, you said French Baroque, so like Couperin, Rameau, that sort of thing.
This is the 18th century, invented about 1700. So yeah, it would have been in Bach's orchestras and before. Yeah. So let's see.
All right. And how many keys does that one have?
This one has 5.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it would be conceivable that people would have played the Mozart concerto on this instrument as well.
Wow.
You know.
Okay. What's next?
So this is a classical bassoon. This one has 10 keys. I have a romantic key on this. I have a C sharp key, which is not really a classical key. Standard classical bassoon, late 18th century, early 19th century would have 7 to 9 keys. This has 10.
So more like Mozart and Beethoven's time.
This, yeah, definitely. This is definitely a Beethoven instrument. But it's sounding a little closer to a modern bassoon.
Right, right.
So you have to realize the purpose of a Baroque bassoon was to play the continuo part. But now we have orchestras, and the bassoon now has to be not only a bass instrument, but a tenor instrument. So right. It's capable of different expression.
And now we are, I assume you're taking us well into the 19th century. Is that true?
I don't have a 19th century.
Oh, that's fine. But do you have now you mentioned you have of course you are our contrabassoon player. Do you have a contrabassoon there that's a little older than the?
Yeah, so let me play the modern contra for those who.
Wow.
I think some people aren't all that familiar with the contrabassoon, but they may not even recognize the sound if they hear it.
But it's pitched exactly an octave below the regular bassoon. Is that correct?
Not lower, yeah.
But obviously, you can see from the plumbing that it's wound around itself at least twice, right?
Right. That is. I'll show you in the history part of this how that came about. This was called an opera model. The older contras went up high, but they couldn't have it in opera houses because then it would stick up above the stage.
And the divas would not allow for that.
So they turned it around to go like this. I think I added a note to that.
No, that was beautiful. For those of you playing along at home, that was probably the most famous contrabassoon solo in the repertoire, and that is the opening of the concerto left-hand piano by Ravel. It's a rare example of the contrabassoon taking the center stage and the limelight. And oh my God!
So this is the original.
What is that?
It's a Baroque contrabassoon. It's 9 feet long. All it is a bassoon made twice as big, so you can get that extra octave. So it's 9 feet tall. It makes it a little hard to perform properly since I only have 8-foot ceilings. I have a little.
I wouldn't. Hope you've never tried to bring that on an airplane.
Well, actually, I have, but you buy a seat for it.
Only the one?
Well, it comes apart.
Oh, of course.
It's 4 pieces, just like a modern bassoon. Just like bassoons, by definition, are 4 pieces.
Yeah.
And so this is just a giant bassoon. Okay, I haven't.
And how old is this? When is this dated?
probably built around the same time as my Baroque bassoon, about 1700, made by a man named, wait a second, I wrote it down. Andreas Eichentoff, who was the father of a family of woodwind makers, oboes, bassoons, other things. And my first Baroque bassoon, which I sold, was made by Johann Eichentoff, his son. But this is the father's instrument, and probably around 1700. And it was probably used whenever someone had one. It's just, anyway, let's see what it sounds like.
Yeah.
The problem is my hands aren't big enough to play it.
Wow. Well, that was something. I'm not sure my audio picked up every last note, but it's an impressive beast nonetheless. And I'm amazed that you were able to put it together. And
and then this is called a classical romantic contrabassoon. So it goes down to low C.
Yeah.
The bassoon goes down to low B flat, but this only goes down to low C, which was standard in contras for most through the 19th century. And it's a classical bassoon that someone later added romantic keys to it. So there's 13 keys on this instrument.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting out there. Of course, the modern bassoon, my bassoon has 23 keys. So,
and that makes it just easier because you don't have to like stretch your hand with like a basketball player's reach.
I can't reach.
Couldn't be done. That's
my hands aren't big enough to play this either.
Yeah.
Actually, well, the reason there's keys on a modern instrument is that our musical values have changed. In the Baroque and well into the to be up till Toscanini and Stravinsky's time, colors were considered beautiful. So each note having its own color. But when you get to Wagner, you have all this chromaticism, and having all the different colors detracted from that. So people started adding keys in order so all the notes sound the same.
Uniformity.
And that's become the desirable thing. And that's why we have all these keys on our wind instruments, is to make every instrument sound the same from note to note. But that in the Baroque time, it was considered unattractive.
Right, like a kind of like, yeah, you want the spice in the food, right?
Now, F major was on my Baroque bassoon is the dark, very dark key sounding, and D major is very bright.
Mm-hmm.
Very different colors because of sharps and flats.
Wow. Well, that's so interesting to also to hear that perspective. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms. But.
Yeah, that's why the keys that pieces are written in the Baroque time are very important, especially when it comes to the winds, is they are taking advantage of the color of that key on that instrument.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's part of the reason I got really fascinated with learning to play these early instruments.
Well, bring us home with a few choice offerings from this magnificent piece.
An F major scale, if I can manage it.
Okay.
Anyway.
Magnificent.
Yeah, well, I'm not very practiced on this. But anyway, and it's also kind of out of shape. I need to. Anyway.
Well, David, this has been so interesting. I mean, it's quite a treasure trove like that you have in this room of yours, and thank you for being our guide through a really fascinating glimpse into your instrument and its history, and your vegetable garden. Maybe the next time we'll do the interview outside, and you can show some of the other part of what making your life tick these days.
Yeah, that'd be fun during the summer. Yeah,
lovely. It's a date. But in the meantime, thank you so much again, as I say, and take care. I look forward to seeing you in person, as I say to all my friends and colleagues in the orchestra, as soon as we can.
Yeah, I hope so. Hope it's soon. I'm waiting for the vaccine.
Absolutely, we all are. But so take care of yourself in the meantime, and thank you again.
Okay, you're welcome. Have a good day.
You too.